Everyone does that.
And like the names are flashing through my head. So Aaron has done these before, but he obviously is back again to talk about a very important topic. I thank you for coming. Thank you for Aaron.
Absolutely.
Okay, Aaron,
no, you got it right.
And without further ado, let's get started.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dina, for... Can everyone hear me? Okay, good. I'm sure everyone can see me too, right? Okay. And so what I'll do is we have roughly an hour, so a little bit of heads up before we get started. And so during my talks, I like to not do all the talking. So if you have questions, just yell them out. You can interrupt me at any time. If I can't fully answer your question, I'll stay afterwards because of time constraints. We need to end roughly around 6. And if we're really slowing down, I'll just let everyone know, okay, no more questions, and then I'll get to everything at the end, and then I'll stay around for your individual questions. I just want to make sure that at the end of today, with all the information I throw at you, if you do get more, you do have questions, you can definitely make sure that you ask them of me. So what we'll do first is, my name, again, is Aaron Lambert. I'm the owner of the Whole Health Nutrition Center. And my purpose, I'm going to come back to that in a second, is to improve the quality of life of as many people as possible through better nutrition and education. So that's why I'm standing here today, to do the education part. And that's why I like coming to CoreLife, because it's a great way to reach a lot of people. They have this, live streaming on Facebook. So if you know of anyone who is struggling with their health, and it doesn't have to be heart disease or diabetes, you can tell them, hey, you missed a talk, you missed a live stream, but go to the CoreLife Facebook page or the Whole Health Nutrition Center Facebook page and have them watch the video. It'll be there forever, and also be on my website too. I'm going to go ahead and just plug the Sustainable Health Expo. It's not for a little while, but it's in November. It's at the VFW in Owego. It's from 12 to 5 p.m. A local chiropractor is putting it on. It's about the 3rd year in a row that he's done it consecutively. And there's going to be a lot of healthcare professionals and a lot of health-related information. So if you know of anybody or yourself interested, put this on your calendar for November 11th. It's a Saturday from 12 to 5. You can, no, I don't. So November 11th from 12 to 5. This will be up on our website in terms of upcoming events, and this is also going to be on our Facebook page as well. Okay, so also in front of you, everyone, I gave handouts. This may be relevant to you, or it may be relevant to somebody else. The reason I gave this information to you is that if you say, aha, I really know somebody who could benefit from this, or it may be yourself, there's a couple of coupons in there to essentially make it almost take the barriers to actually coming into an initial appointment down completely. So you'll see a couple of coupons on the back. You have my information, you have my card. And even if the person or yourself says, well, that place isn't exactly what I'm looking for, if whoever you're looking at or thinking of is really suffering or not able to improve their health, then maybe they'll go see someone else. So still hand them the information. They might say, oh, but I'm going to go over here. That's fine too, as long as the person is working on improving their health in a consistent manner. So let's see. So the subject today is, why is this so important? So I started doing some digging. So the first thing that I'll go over is, why is it important in terms of society and in general? But then we're going to get into, why is it important for each individual as well? So I put some numbers up here because I want everyone to grasp the gravity of the situation when it comes to diabetes and all the health-related symptoms that come with it. So I have this right here. You can see diabetes at the top. In 2001, it was thought by 2050 we would have roughly 30 million people with diabetes. And in 2000, we had 11 million people. Then you see right below it, in 2015, we already have 30 million people with diabetes. So in just 15 years, we beat the original estimate for 2050, and that's not a good thing. We don't want to beat that estimate. And another reason why I'm putting this out there is that when you see the numbers, you can even pretty much guess or think that those numbers might be inflated rather than being overinflated. So The next slide here to give you an idea. So type 1, type 2 will increase by 54% by 2030 from 2015. The majority of that will be type 2 diabetes. And most of the talk will relate to how type 2 diabetes and the related symptoms occur, but a lot of this also is related to type 2 or type 1. The other thing that you see there is diabetes deaths will increase by 38% to 385,000. Right now, diabetes is the number 7 cause of death. But it's also thought that it's underreported because diabetes leads to so many other health conditions like kidney failure and heart disease that it may be much more prevalent in terms of a primary cause for death. And it's going to continue to rise, so it's going to pass number 6, it's going to pass number 7, and it's going to continue as we have more and more people with diabetes. And then there's the social cost. So you can see here, by 2030, it's going to cost this United States $622 billion, and that's up from just 15 years at 2015 from 408. And the reason I put that up there is you can see diabetes is going to be a big lead weight on the healthcare system in this country. And what's so sad about it is we're doing it to ourselves. You develop type 2 diabetes and the related health issues that I'll talk about by your food choices. It's almost solely driven by what a person eats on a day-to-day basis. So we could fix this, and it doesn't have to go this way. So you can only imagine what the cost will be in 2050. The other thing to keep in mind is that if a person goes in the direction of diabetes, they generally spend 2.5 more on health care as time goes on. So there goes retirement plans, there goes lots of things that people might want to do later in life because they're all going to be giving it to the hospitals and the doctors and so forth because of what they have with type 2 diabetes and related issues. So again, by 2050, if you can really grasp this, right now about 1 in 10 people have diabetes or have been diagnosed with diabetes. But by 2050, 1 in 3. So you can imagine if 1 in 3 people in this room will develop diabetes, that's quite a lot of us. And it was roughly 100 million people. So the initial estimate by 2050 was 30 million. It's now estimated that it will be 100 million people. Again, imagine the drag that this is going to put on our healthcare system, but also think of the drag it's going to put on individual families, that they have to deal with the health-related issues that come from having diabetes. It's going to take a lot of money out of the pockets of families and so forth, and really create havoc in households because of the issues that are associated with diabetes. So I wanted to give this to you in terms of the overarching scenario, because it's not just about your own individual health as we go through today. You have to think about how well you take care of yourself, how much, if you don't do that, how much strain will that put on your family, how much strain will that put on your social network, on the church that you're in it with, and the business that you're involved with. If you have diabetes and get complications and you can't come into work. There's a lot of other things in just your health. So a lot of times when I talk to people, I say if you're not going to do it for yourself, do it for your loved ones so they don't have to take care of you later when you have a stroke. If anybody here has a family member that has to be taken care of due to a health-related issue, you know how much time and effort is put into that. And we can prevent that simply by changing our diet. So I thought I'd throw this little map up here. So you see this is adults with diabetes in 1994. The gray area is between 2 and 5%. The little blue area is roughly between 6 and 7%. So that's 1994. You can see diabetes, it's around, but it's not that prevalent. Now, if diabetes was a communicable disease, and it did this by 2015, you can imagine what the CDC would be doing. We'd be running for cover. We'd be, if it had a really interesting name like Zika, or it was something that you can make a drug for really quickly and cure it, you can imagine the state of panic in this country if it went from this to this in 20 years. That's incredible. And the dark blue is 15%. So we're not even to 2050. They're going to have to find a whole bunch of new colors in the next 20 years to have an actual map. So you can see how it's spreading at an exponential rate through the United States. Just as a quick geography quiz, does anyone know the only state that's not having an issue as of right now? Colorado. Yeah, Colorado. Colorado is the only one that stayed gray. Very interesting. So if this was a communicable disease, everyone would be flying to get to Colorado, and they would be trying to keep us out because they wouldn't want us coming in there with that disease. But unfortunately with diabetes, it's very insidious. It can take 10, 20, 30 years. Same thing with heart disease, hypertension, to actually make itself known. So you have to be really watchful of your health and very watchful of the foods that you eat, because it takes decades sometimes for these issues to actually develop. So now diabetes does not happen in a vacuum. It's part of a much larger condition and a much larger issue. Has anyone heard of metabolic syndrome before? Let's see a couple of nods. But metabolic syndrome is something to describe, essentially the way I look at it, as a person's health going in the wrong direction. And there's a lot of warning signs and things that will tell you that you're not headed in the right direction, so you can make corrections. So a large waistline, I gave the inches for men and women in terms of the circumference around the midsection. Now the thing about having metabolic syndrome, diabetes, and heart disease is you don't have to be overweight. You can be what it's called skinny fat, meaning that you look skinny, but on the inside, and I'll show you what visceral fat looks like, you can be really loaded with inside visceral fat, which is extremely damaging to a person's health. But you notice that you can have metabolic syndrome and be relatively thin, because you only need to have 3 of these 5 traits to be diagnosed with metabolic syndrome. So if your triglycerides are over 150, high blood pressure is over, or high blood sugar is over 100, blood pressure is higher than 140 over 90. But as a little caveat, as you get older, your blood pressure is supposed to increase. So it's been determined recently that if you're 60 or over, that high blood pressure around 150, 155 over 90 is actually healthy, because as a person gets older, their arteries tend to harden, and the body does need to push the blood through a little bit harder to get blood to every organ and every tissue. So you could actually overcompensate if you're older by knocking your blood pressure down too low, and then a person will get dizzy and have fainting spells and things like that. So the 140 over 90 was generally younger than 60. And then low HDL, everyone's heard of HDL, high density lipoproteins, and we'll go over that too, but below 40. And as you can see, you only need 3 of 5 of these to be diagnosed with metabolic syndrome, which puts you on a path to poor health. And even though I said you don't have to be heavy or obese to have metabolic syndrome, obesity, though, is a driving force behind this. It's mostly tied to these symptoms that I indicated. Does anyone have any questions? No? Okay. So the importance of knowing if you have metabolic syndrome is because you're more likely to develop a whole host of issues, from heart disease, diabetes, strokes, breathing problems. So a lot of sleep apnea is someone going in the direction of metabolic syndrome. Gallstones, PCOS, polycystic ovarian cysts is very much tied to the warning traits to have diabetes, particularly becoming insulin resistant and having high insulin. And a lot of young women run around with PCOS and are misdiagnosed. So that's having a lot of cysts on the ovaries. That's the imbalance between testosterone and estrogen, so might develop a lot of facial hair and a lot of symptoms that are also very similar to diabetes. And has anyone ever heard of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease? I see some yeses and some nos. This is something that's becoming more and more prevalent, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is driven by the foods that you eat, and it's really driven by the amount of sugar and processed carbohydrates. So as a person goes into a state of metabolic syndrome, the body stores fat on the liver, and if the liver has fat on it, it doesn't function properly and can actually go in the direction just like a person was a heavy drinker. So you can develop cirrhosis of the liver by eating too much sugar. And it's something that's becoming more and more prevalent. And doctors can scan for this, and they can say, yes, you have a fatty liver, or no, your liver's in great shape. So if you're concerned, you can ask your doctor to do something like that. Go ahead.
I'm Jerry. Isn't fatty liver reversible?
Yes. So yes, this fatty liver is reversible, and that's the nice thing about everything we're going to talk about. Diabetes is reversible. You can reverse heart disease. You can reverse a fatty liver. The thing is, you're going to have to really work at it, and the more you are in the hole, the more you have to work at it. But you can get your body to take the fat off by stop feeding it all the processed food and sugar. The body will say, well, I'm not getting an overload, so let's just take it from the areas that it's been stored on, and it will go away to one degree or another. And it will happen throughout the body. Another thing to do is insulin resistance is very much tied to metabolic syndrome and diabetes. So if there's any concern, you can go to your doctor and say, as you see at the bottom, you can get fasting insulin numbers. And he'll do that. So you fast, and he'll say, this is what your insulin numbers are. You can see that ideally they should be below 3. But if they're at 5, you're still doing okay. But once you go above 5, that's a good indicator that you're diabetic or you're right in there with the metabolic syndrome. And the problem with all this is that you can have heart disease and not have diabetes, and then 10 years later get diabetes. Or you can have diabetes and no heart disease, and 10, 15 years later, you have heart disease, gallstones. So they can all overlap. It's not one or the other, which can make a person's health really deteriorate quite quickly. And the way I look at it is, this fly just really, is the way I look at it is that once you have a weak spot, then you're more likely to develop more weak spots. That's why when you start looking at the metabolic syndrome and you go, oops, blood sugar's over 100, whoops, high triglycerides over 150, you're starting to develop weak spots, and you need to act on it before another weak spot shows up. And before you know it, you'll have too many weak spots, and you'll really be in trouble.
But so then what goes back to your genetics? I mean, are you can you fight it even still?
And that's a very good question. So the question was, what about it being genetically predisposed? And some people will definitely have certain weaknesses than others. One of the things that's a most definite result of eating habits is that you can turn on and off genes depending on your eating habits. And the worse you eat, the more likely you are to turn on bad genes. And the better you eat, you're more likely to keep the good genes on and the bad genes off. Another thing that you'll frequently see is that you have patterns in the family, like this family has heart disease, this family has diabetes. But when you look at their diet, they're all eating the same. So it's not so much a genetic reason, but also a eating habit reason. Everyone in the family sits at the same dinner table is eating the same. If one or two of those family members changed their diet, they would probably no longer look like the rest of their family. So you can do more than you think by making sure that you keep the processed foods and sugars out of your diet. And I'll go over some more specifics later. So I thought we'd have some fun and look at what happens inside the body. Now I tried to find the least gross photos. There's a lot of really nasty photos you can really see what can happen to a person's health. But one of the things with metabolic syndrome and diabetes is it causes tissue degradation. And most people, you never see what's going on inside your body. You don't know what's deteriorating. So this is a healthy kidney at the top, and these are diseased kidneys brought on by diabetes. The bottom one on there on your right is a diabetic kidney, someone who's had diabetes for a number of years. What's happened is the tissue has essentially turned into fibrous tissue, and all the little tubules are all gummed up with this fibrous tissue. So your kidneys are very much involved in your excreting waste and also managing your blood pressure. So if you're losing control of your kidneys, you're going to have a hard time ever managing your blood pressure. And if your blood pressure is hard to manage, you're going to have weak spots throughout your arteries, through your heart, and in your brain. So you can see it will have more like a domino effect. You're also more likely to wind up on dialysis. So diabetes is the #1 reason under the age of 75 for kidney disease. It's the #1 reason for going blind, and it's the #1 reason for non-accident amputation. And I'll show you some pictures as to why that happens. So when you're looking at your food, you have to look at it as, will it make a healthy kidney, or is this yummy food that my taste buds really like going to create over time the possibility of a really disgusting kidney? And I call these types of organs rotted out pumpkins. You know, that pumpkin that's been out for too long, it's all mushy and gooey. That's what these organs are like, and they're in a living person. So you can imagine the struggle that that person's having to improve their health. Now, when it gets to this point, there's no return. You can't reverse this. So my purpose is to get to everyone as quickly as possible before it gets to this stage. And therefore, you can reverse the process. And if you're already in this stage, then we'll do the best we can. But there are limitations. So again, when you're looking at heart disease and the foods that you're eating, I thought you'd like to see what the heart looks like that's diseased and a healthy one. You notice all the healthy organs have a nice pink sheen to them. That's a healthy heart. Now you see the other ones, the yellow is all the fat that's been deposited on the arteries. And the bottom heart is all the fibrous tissue that looks like the kidney. So the tissue's been damaged too fast, and the body replaces it with fibrous tissue. You can imagine the breathing problems and the energy problems and the poor health that this person had before he actually died or she died with that kind of heart. You can also see on the other side a very large heart versus a small heart. They're both very poor hearts in the fact that they have all the fat on them, but the heart will grow larger in compensation for it being a really weak muscle. So it tries to grow larger to do its job because its muscle tissue is very weak. And it's the same muscle tissue that you have in your arms and legs. So it's trying to overcompensate for being a weak tissue or weak muscle. The yellow here and the other things we'll talk about, this is not anything to do with cholesterol and saturated fat. This is deposited on your organs and tissues by the sugars that you eat, by the processed grains that you eat. So the lovely pizza, the lovely pasta, the lovely bread, and the buns that you put on the hamburger, and the sweeteners you put in your drinks, and all of those, and even fruit juice. You know, if you look at fruit juice, it's 40, 50 grams of sugar in fruit juice. So fruit juices can actually be worse than a can of soda. Now, one or two of them is not going to do this, but you think that this develops over 10, 20, 30 years. Now, at some point, if you notice you're having health issues or your blood work indicates that you have problems, you can begin to reverse this to one degree or another. But I always say, why wait till your blood work says you have a problem? Why not do something right away? This is what it looks like in terms of the arteries. Again, all that gunk in the middle, it's not due to cholesterol and saturated fat. And I'll show you more about that. But you can also see all the yellow here. That's all fat that's glopping around the arteries due to what the person's eating. And of course, then you get a diseased artery down here. So to one extent, this one obviously isn't salvageable, but there's a chance the other one could be if the person worked really hard. And these can happen anywhere. This right here just happens to be from the heart. So I wanted to show you this because death due to heart disease, and we're talking diabetes, was almost unknown. It was still known, but it was very small compared to today, and so was heart disease. So my question always is, what changed? Did the human physiology suddenly change in 80 years to where the foods that we eat we can't handle? Or is it the foods changed over that time to where our body can't handle the foods anymore? And my money's on the bet that the foods change that we eat to the point where our bodies can't handle them anymore. So right around the 1940s, and a little bit sooner, you have Crisco, margarine, you have all the man-made fats, you have trans fats that came into play, you have a great push to sell sugar and all those sorts of things. And you can see what it did to our health. And particularly women now die more from heart disease than men, and women were marketed towards very heavily for low fat, no fat, those kinds of things. And those also contained a lot of sugar to make up for the lack of taste. So helping women drive towards heart disease and diabetes. So I put this up here because when cholesterol is thought of as the big bugaboo, the one that's going to really get you, like this arrow here. And I'm putting this in here because when you want to change your diet, eating really good fat from both animal and plant sources is very necessary to get yourself out of these health conditions, whether it's just metabolic syndrome, heart disease, diabetes in general, type 1 or type 2. Now, there's a lot of information here, and I'll leave this up for a second. But again, this will play again on all our websites. But the thing you have to keep in mind is cholesterol is a nutrient. It's classified as a nutrient. And back here, the US government finally said in a report that came out 2 years ago, and of course you didn't hear anything about it, I happened to capture it in a Newsweek article and then the information was gone, is that there is absolutely no scientific information that can prove beyond a shadow of doubt that cholesterol is an issue with all the research we've been doing since the 1950s. So cholesterol goes where inflammation is. And so cholesterol gets blamed for the fact of being at the site of plaque in your arteries because it's going there to put the fire out. The fire is caused by high blood pressure because as the blood goes through and it's too high, it actually has a lot of friction and will cause damage to your arteries and the cholesterol goes there. But it's also caused by eating too much sugar and processed foods. Dr. Oz had a great explanation. It's like nails or glass going through your arteries and just scraping away. So when you look at that wonderful sundae, think of those arteries I showed you earlier. That's the direction that that sundae would want you to go. Now it's also very important for sex hormones and stress hormones. It's a very important part of your skin, brain, and all your cellular membranes. That's why when people take cholesterol-lowering medications, they can have all sorts of muscle pain, particularly for women as they get older. They actually develop symptoms that are very close to Alzheimer's and dementia because it's stealing the bodybuilding nutrients for your brain, for your nerves, and for your muscles. So cholesterol has absolutely nothing to do, unless it's a severe case of cholesterolemia where it's super high, with overall health. And you have to understand that because if you're trying to improve your health from diabetes or metabolic syndrome, not to be afraid of foods that have cholesterol in them. They will actually be very helpful. And I put this down here at the bottom. LDL is not a bad cholesterol. There is no such thing as an inherently bad and inherently good cholesterol. It's the quality of the particles, and the quality of the particles is determined by the foods that you eat. So what I said earlier is we have complete control over this whole situation unless there's some very specific genetic thing that, and compared to the rest of society, those kind of instances are very small compared to the ability to control it because there is no genetic reason why you shouldn't with most of us. And I just put this down here because when you hear HDL, LDL, and VDL, you need to know that that just stands for a lipoprotein. And all they're saying is it's a little particle made up of proteins, triglycerides, which are fatty acids, and cholesterol. And that's all they are. And those are little packets that your body pushes through the bloodstream to carry things from one point to the other. So when someone says you have HDL, it's just high density lipoprotein. And that's all it's saying. It's a high density particle filled with some triglycerides, some fats, and some cholesterol. The body doesn't like things to wander through the bloodstream, so it puts them in little packets. And the one that gets most of blame is the LDL. And I'm going to come back to that in a second. So real quickly, I also put this here for your general knowledge. Saturated fats are not called saturated fats because they saturate your arteries with fat. And it's an unfortunate name for them because it's used to a disadvantage. So saturated fats are only called saturated because every single hydrogen atom is covered with a carbon. So it's saturated with carbon atoms. That's the only reason it's called saturated. And it gets a very bad name, but saturated fats, both animal and plant, from real sources, not refined sources, like avocados and lard and coconut oil, which they've been doing a big campaign to tell everyone that coconut oil is bad. How many people have seen that? Yeah. They're doing a good job because a lot of people have seen that. That's the American Heart Association, the American Medical Association, still working on 1970s and 1980s. Fat's bad for you. Good fat from the right source is good. The bad fat is the man-made margarines, the canola oils. If you ever saw the, what's her name, Florence from the Brady Bunch, she was a big marketer, used very widely to promote Western oil for women, a very dangerous fat for anybody's heart. And what got mixed in was trans fats. Trans fats are saturated fats, but they're also caused by what we do when we refine them. So when you're talking about bad fats that are saturated, it's the trans fats that everyone has heard of. And then you have monosaturated fats and polyunsaturated fats. And that's just saying that there's one less carbon on a monosaturated fat, and a polyunsaturated fat has 2 or more missing carbons. That's all that means. So when you see saturated fat, it's only because of the molecular structure. It has nothing to do with what it does with the heart. So what I thought too, when we're looking at your blood work, or when, go ahead.
Weren't they just so recently saying that coconut oil was good for you?
And then now they're, and that's what you'll find is when one industry is noticing that there's information regarding its product. So when someone says coconut oil is good, well, the those who make margarine, those who make the man-made fats will notice a decline in their sales. So they'll find somebody to say, hey, let's push this over here so we can get ourselves back in the news and say, that stuff is still bad. You want to come eat our stuff. So a lot of it is what I call myth in marketing, and that's why people get so confused. One day this is good, and one day this is bad. But if you stick to a very basic idea, which is if it's refined, it's not very good. If it's unrefined, it's usually very good for you. So unrefined coconut oil is fantastic, but refined coconut oil is not that good. So you have to wonder too, with the tests that they do, did they use refined or unrefined? And so the same thing goes when they say meat is bad for you. Well, did they use junky commercial meat, or did they use organic meat? You know, what was the quality of the substance they tested? And so my goal here as part of the education is to help you bust through that myth in marketing so you can say, I know what they're doing with that test. They just got somebody to say this. And that's what happens. So, you know, when high fructose corn syrup, people caught on to that. The Corn Association wanted the FDA to allow them to call it something else. So they're always playing these games to stay one ahead of the consumer, so they will hope that you don't know what you're eating, which all those foods that they're doing that with are the ones that will make you have heart disease and strokes and diabetes and so forth. But one thing when you're looking at your blood work, you want to keep it, your high density should be 50 or higher. Your triglycerides should be lower than 150, but I like to see it closer to 100. Cholesterol, just to keep this in mind, remember I said cholesterol has very little to do with it, but frequently when people go to the doctor, they will say, it's 202, you got to take a statin. Oh, it's 250 or 215, you got to take a statin. Even the Mayo Clinic, even though they still put too much emphasis on cholesterol, says that between 200 and 239, you're not in a danger zone. So one thing you have to do is understand your blood work so that when you're told to be put on this or that, you can say no with confidence. That's not what I'm going to do because I know what my blood work really tells me. And none of this is in a vacuum. So you can't look at your cholesterol and say, oh, it's 210, I'm really good. You have to see what all the other numbers look at too. So your fasting blood sugar should be below 100. You should know that if your blood sugar is between 100 and 125 for 2 or more blood tests for fasting glucose, you're now pre-diabetic. And if it's over 125 for 2 or more tests, you're now diabetic. And you can actually track your own blood work, and you can actually diagnose yourself with these numbers. And these numbers are completely controllable through diet. And what generally happens is if you eat real food, you'll see your HDL go up, your triglycerides will go down, and triglycerides and HDL are better predictors of heart disease than cholesterol ever was. So if your triglycerides are flying up, but your cholesterol looks pretty good, you're actually in more danger than you think. And then for those who have heard of A1C, this is a 3-month average of your blood sugar, and it should be below 5.7. And if you're not having any issues, you'll probably never see it on your blood work. But if you're deemed diabetic, your doctor will probably run an A1C test to see how much damage is being done to your, because A1C really says how many sugar molecules are sticking to your red blood cells, and you don't want that many sugar molecules sticking to your red blood cells. It makes them makes it very hard for them to transfer the oxygen and to move through the body because they will stick together and clump. So the more sugar stuck to your blood cells, the more they clump, which leads to low energy, blood clots and things like that. So high blood sugar, even when it gets close to, even if it's pre-diabetic and you say, oh, I'm still good, there are other things going on. So if you want to know how well you're doing, and you want to know the particle size of your LDL, and this is the most important thing, you take your triglycerides and you divide them by your HDL. So if your triglycerides are 50 and your HDL is 50 and your triglycerides are 200, you have a number of 4. Now the further away you get from a number of 2, the smaller, more compact, and more damaging your LDL particles are. So it's important to know the quality, not the quantity, and that's what you need to see when you look at your blood work. So someone may say, oh, you have a 220 cholesterol. Well, what's my triglycerides? What's my HDL? What are all these other numbers? So if they said 220 cholesterol, but then you say, well, my triglyceride, and frequently they won't point this out to you. You'll have to look at it. So the best thing to do is to bring your triglycerides down and your HDL up. And as I mentioned earlier, if you just knock off the processed foods and the sugars, it naturally will happen. And it's not that difficult, or I should say it's not that complicated in theory, but it is in practice, because a lot of people struggle with the what do I eat, what do I replace with, is this healthy, is this not healthy, the emotional aspect and things like that. But if you want to improve your particle size, cut out the junk, your HDL will go up, your triglycerides will go down. And they will go from small to a large fluffy. So you want little cotton balls roaming around through your bloodstream instead of these little racket balls that dig into the epithelial tissue of your arteries and cause damage and inflammation. And then what happens? You develop a plaque, cholesterol goes there to put out the inflammation, and it gets blamed for the end result, but the cause was the eating habits and the damage done earlier from these little guys. So I'm going to skip through this real quick because I think we got the point. But the best book I've ever read is Good Calories, Bad Calories by Gary Taubes. It's not an easy read, but it's got I don't know how he did it. He's got all the research, all the papers, all the doctors, all the researchers in this book, and it's probably 1/5 footnotes. So I've never seen anything done this well, and he lays it out scientifically, and it goes through everything I mentioned in a very detailed manner. And if you ever truly wanted to be an expert, this would be the book to read. I wish I had read it earlier. I read it about a year ago. So what I thought I'd do is, go ahead.
You said it's not an easy read.
It's.
So, is it very scientific, or is it something that's good for the common person?
He does well with, he doesn't throw a whole lot of scientific jargon. He keeps everything together in that far, but there's so much information, and there's some physiology and anatomy you do need to know. So it may take some time to get through it. Now he has another book called Why We Get Fat and What to Do About It, which he took this book because of that specific question and made it about 1/3 as thick without all the footnotes. So if you want to get a quick jump into what's in here, you get the book Why We Get Fat and What to Do About It, and you'll get a good gist for what's in here. But ultimately, this is the book. And it took me a couple of months to get through to give you an idea of how carefully you should read the book. And I'm probably going to read it again once my brain can finish absorbing all that information. So one thing I mentioned earlier about visceral fat, and I wanted to show you this, and I hope this works. I've tried some new technology here. So I wanted you to see what happens and hear about what happens with visceral fat, which is actually increases the more you have those issues like I talked about, like high blood pressure, high blood sugar, triglycerides, and eating processed foods and processed sugar.
Leads to a healthier, longer life. So when we measure around our waist, we're really measuring this gelatin fat. You see how closely packed together the organs are here? You need that amount of fat. That's healthy. But over here, this is unfortunately what a lot of us are dealing with. All that excess fat surrounding your organs. Your organs are separated by basically this toxic goop. I call it an alien invader. And I want to talk to everyone a little bit about what's happening inside your abdomen and why having a lean belly is such a key to good health. So you're walking around with too much abdominal fat. This fat you're looking at is visceral fat. It doesn't just sit there. It truly is toxic goop encircling all of your organs. It's increasing inflammation. It actually secretes chemicals that increase inflammation throughout your body. But it also affects your cardiovascular system. It increases, over time, your blood pressure, amongst other things. And as all these parameters are changing, your abdomen, that visceral belly fat, is doing other things. It's increasing production of something called interleukin-6. This chemical further increases inflammation throughout your body. And as this happens, something else really interesting is occurring. Your metabolism is being governed by this excess body fat. Adiponectin is affected. And what does it do when you don't have enough of it? It tells you to store more belly fat. So it's a vicious cycle to poor health. Your liver is overwhelmed with cholesterol. Well, what is...
So that's something, has anyone heard that before about visceral fat? It's the fat that's inside the body. It's not in the layers of the skin. And hopefully this will, there we go. And here's a side diagram. It's inside the body, and this is what it looks like. That's a actual picture. There's a drawing, but you can see what it does. It pushes up against the organs and tissues. It creates inflammation. So anybody who has arthritic conditions, anyone who has any kind of itis, whether it's colitis or gastritis or arthritis, has problems with asthma, anything that's inflammatory, this makes it much, much worse. It's like the sun continuing to put off energy, but in this case, you've got your own internal combustion putting off inflammation. Now, you don't have to be super thin. But you do have to try to be as thin as you can be, because there are many different body types. So I'm not giving the impression that you have to be thin, but you have to be as thin as your body will allow you to. And also, the more that you eat the real foods, the less the body will deposit it in the midsection, and the more it will take away from it. So the more visceral fat you have, the more likely you have to chronic low-grade inflammation, and visceral fat is a key predictor of heart disease. So the more visceral fat, the more likely you are to have cardiovascular disease and heart disease. And this is all managed by diet. You can manage that by the foods that you choose to eat and the foods that you choose not to eat. This is a fatty liver at the top. I talked about that earlier. I just wanted you to see what a picture of that looks like. Healthy liver. And if things keep going in the wrong direction, that's a cirrhotic liver there. And you can get that without being an alcoholic. You can get that with too much sugar. Now, it doesn't always have to go in that direction, but it can. Most people will develop a fatty liver, and the more you fall into that metabolic syndrome, and the more of those 5 I indicated, the more likely you are to have a fatty liver. This is a pancreas, and these are 2 different pancreases that have been overworked, and essentially just like the heart I showed you and the kidney, you can slowly damage your pancreas to the point where it no longer functions properly. And a lot of that is due to, again, the foods that we eat and chronic low-grade inflammation, as I mentioned earlier. And what happens is the body, the pancreas begins to break down faster than it recovers. You get a lot of fibrous tissue, and then the pancreas stops working properly. And imagine what happens at that point. You're stuck. You're going to be diabetic. You're going to have all sorts of digestive issues. You're probably going to get pancreatitis. And if anyone's had pancreatitis, it's one of the worst things you can ever experience. Probably worse than if anyone's had gallstones, a severe gallbladder or kidney stone attack. It's worse than that. Just to see, this is what can happen to a person's skin. And these are actually the best pictures I could find. That's why some people look away. But what happens is you lose the ability to get nutrition and blood to various parts of the body, and you actually develop necrotic skin and ulcers throughout the body. So if this is happening on the outside, imagine what can happen on the inside. Also here, it's a little hard to tell, but this is a normal eye. And then as you eat more and more processed food and sugar and additives and preservatives, you actually cause abnormal blood vessel growth. You can have microaneurysms, little hemorrhages. Your nerves begin to get bumps on them, is I guess the best way to explain it. And over time, you can see the final result of the eye down at the bottom. You get essentially what you call a very cloudy eye. And this is the direction that you don't have to have diabetes, but even just having metabolic syndrome for many, many years the eye will take. And the eye and the kidney are the two most susceptible to high blood sugar and just the sugar that you eat. And the body is only supposed to have 2 or 3 teaspoons at a time in the bloodstream. So if you eat something that has 40 grams of sugar, you have 10 times more than your body ever wants. And that over the years has lots of damage. So when you look at your foods, don't look at it in terms of grams. When you look at what you're eating, think of it in terms of teaspoons. And so a teaspoon is 4 grams. So when you look at something and you see the ingredients and it says 20 grams, it doesn't register really as much as 5 teaspoons. So who here would just sit down and go, yummy? There might be someone, that used to be me, ooh, I'll eat 5 teaspoons of sugar at once. But it really lets you know how much you're doing, and would you really want to sit there and put that much into your body at that point in time?
What if you feel like you're addicted to sugar like I am, and is it better to go cold turkey?
Very good question, and I'll actually jump into this. I was going to save that for later, but when you have trouble, when you're trying to change your diet, you want to do it very, very slowly, particularly if you're addicted to sugar, which was my case. I was a person, I used to work for Coca-Cola, to give you an idea of the direction I'm trying to go. So I would have a Coke for this and a candy bar for that, and I couldn't stop eating sugar. The only way that has been effective for me and for many of my clients is you do it maybe, let's say you're eating 30 servings a week. The next week you do 28. The next week you do 26. And maybe you can go a little bit faster and go to 22. And it might take 4 months, 5 months to get to the last little bit. But that whole time you're beginning to wean yourself off the sugar, and you're also learning what to put in place of it. Because if you go cold turkey and too fast, you're left with a vacuum.
But it's not like being an alcoholic where if I get down to 1 sugar treat a week, are you supposed to cut out everything that's processed?
It depends on the person. Some people, if they have a little bit of sugar, that's it. So they just don't have any. And sugar is just like any other addiction. It actually can be much stronger than many addictions. It goes to the little serotonin centers in your brain. Your cells want it. And one of the things that Gary Taubes also explained is that if you're gaining weight and you're storing the food that you eat more as fat, you're actually locking away the nutrition inside your fat cells. So when you eat, most of it goes into your fat cells and not to you. So very shortly thereafter, you're hungry again, and you eat again because I just ate, but I'm hungry, my cravings are up. So the only way out of that is that very slow step in the other direction. And when you get to that last little few, some people will say, that's it, I don't even need sugar anymore, it just tastes bad. Others will say, I can't ever have it because if I have a little bit, I'm off to the races like someone, like an alcoholic. So there's a lot of things, and people will surprise themselves that you can be much more resilient if you have the foods to go to. And that's one of the things I do with my clients is if we take foods out, foods have to come in. There can't be a vacuum, because if there's a vacuum, you're much more likely to fail. So when I talk to clients, it's not about a diet. Diets are designed to make you fail. They're short term, and then you do well, and then everyone's seen it, or maybe experience yourself, and you're right back where you were before, and usually you're in a worse position. People, the more you go up and down, the more likely you are to gain more weight the next time you have difficulty. So if you break the cycle by learning how to eat properly for the rest of your life and be consistent, it's not a diet anymore, it's a way of eating. So that's my goal, is to change your way of eating, not put you on a diet. Because diets are short-term and designed to fail, and the diet industry loves it because they know human habit, and it's very well studied that you'll do this for so long, you'll fall off the wagon, and then you'll repeat right back to that diet and pay more money, or go to another place and pay them more money. So why not pay the local Weiss, or what's the word I'm looking for, Wegmans, or the farmer's market, that money, and be as healthy as you can and stop the roller coaster effect. But it does take a lot of effort. And I've just put a lot of excuses, and maybe this will be you, maybe it won't. One of the things I hear about is too difficult. Number 9, I like my sugar. It's too much to give up. Another one is it's too expensive, and the answer to that is that's a baloney. It's not too expensive. You don't have to go all organic. You can just get the junk out and put that money that was going to all that junk food. If you look at it, that food is high priced for what you get. Take that money and put it to the good food, and you'll probably come out even with the money that you're spending. So too expensive is not a valid excuse. And you'll see all the ones here. This is the one where you just give up. I'll learn to live with it. The other one is I'll do it later, which means I'll never do it. So you can put where you're playing games with yourself. And I put this here because if you're playing games with yourself, your eating philosophy is not matching your physiology, and you're in trouble, or you know that you have a family history of being in trouble with your health, then all you're doing is maintaining a philosophy that does not match your physiology, which means things will only get worse.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Before I forget, get on it, I heard recently, before they believed that sugar from fruits were just as bad, and I heard recently on the news that that's not true.
Well, it's true and not true, and I'll explain why. It's true and not true in the sense that fruit comes with all sorts of good vitamins and minerals and so forth. So the thing I tell most clients is eat your fruit, don't drink your fruit. Now, if you drink your fruit, you're creating a very dangerous situation because there's so much sugar in fruit. Who's going to sit and eat 12 oranges? Well, you'll do that if you drink the orange juice. And again, there's more sugar in that. And the problem is it's fructose. Fructose is actually metabolized by your liver. So if you do too much fruit juice, you actually will speed up getting a fatty liver. So it can actually be worse than regular sugar. Now, also too, many people have used up what I call your sugar quota. So even eating fruit could be too much at certain points, particularly in the beginning when you're trying to improve your diet. So frequently, particularly with women, and I have no idea why it's more for women, if you have a lot of joint pain, particularly the hands, the wrist, and so forth, if I get the fruit out, that goes away. And sometimes we can put fruit as fruit, eating fruit back in later, but they always have to keep the fruit juice out. Sometimes I have a few clients that even if they eat a little bit of fruit, it just causes the inflammation to go crazy. So it depends on, that's why I said it's both true and not true. It depends on your current health situation and how you're eating the fruit. So did I answer your question?
Yeah, I like sugar, but I tried to replace it with fruit. And I was glad to hear that you recently said that the sugar you get from fruit is not bad. And what I do is I freeze it. I freeze grapes and I'll freeze watermelon, and it'll be like, just to me, like a much different dessert.
And that could actually be, if you have, like I say, no warning signs, your blood sugar is not too high, your triglycerides are in good shape, you could actually be doing the best thing for yourself. You're feeding that sugar addiction with real fruit, getting a lot of minerals and vitamins and not getting all the empty calories and inflammation. So if your health is generally in good shape and that's how you're doing it, you might actually be in great shape. Now, for someone who's diabetic, that might not work, or someone who has a lot of internal inflammation, that might not work. So it all depends on where you're at, but it sounds like you're doing the right thing for yourself. And it's also a matter of degrees. If I have to put someone on fruit to get them off sugar before I get them off all the sugar, that's fine too, because eventually we can get them off all the sugar if necessary. And then maybe we can come back with berries are usually the best fruits to eat because they're very low glycemic, very low sugar, but tons of nutrition. One thing I wanted to show you, would anyone have guessed that Seinfeld and Christoph Waltz, is everyone familiar with him? He's from Austria. So this is, Seinfeld took him to an international house of pancakes. And I never would have guessed, but you get the best insight into the general eating philosophy in this country and why the health is going down the tube. So hopefully you'll be able to hear this. Hopefully it'll play. There we go.
Are you careful about what you eat? Would you eat that?
No wonder that healthcare is so expensive.
We have to fix all of that after you eat it. Don't worry about the consequences. You eat what you want, we'll fix it. That's the American way of life. I don't know why you're living here.
I couldn't have said it any better if it took me 100 years to come up with somebody. And that's how we eat. That's how I used to eat. I'll eat what I want. I'll do it whenever I want. Doesn't matter. Somehow, some way, it'll be fixed. And when you're looking at your foods, and I call this actually a tendency to be selfish, is I'm not going to change. I'm not going to do anything because you only live once, so forth and so on. But who's going to fix it? Who's going to pay for it? Your family, yourself later down the line. Who wants to end up in a nursing home any sooner if they're going to than they want? I don't see anyone raising their hand and say, boy, I can't wait to go to a nursing home. Who wants to wind up on kidney dialysis? And, you know, that's Jerry Seinfeld's way of saying, we'll fix it later. We'll put you on kidney dialysis. We'll give you a medication. You can fix that by not going to places like IHOP and eating all of that inflammatory food. That all you saw there was inflammatory food. I also thought that everyone should get an idea, if you haven't heard this before, is that Alzheimer's dementia is also being classified as type 3 diabetes. Has anyone heard that before? So some yeses and some nos. And what I showed you here, here's a non-diabetic brain, and here is a diabetic brain. So who wants to have the diabetic brain? Look how shrunken it is. This is the center, and I don't want to forget this. This is the center that really shrinks. That's the hippocampus. And it's the center of emotion, memory, and your autonomic nervous system. So it's things that control, you know, your bowel movements and so forth. So when you get to this direction, you actually can start losing your function, your nerve function. So you start walking funny. Everyone's seen with dementia and Alzheimer's, there's a change in the gait. There's a change in how you control your bowels. There's a change in how you become incontinent. All these things can happen when you're diabetic or have long-term metabolic syndrome because your brain's actually shrinking and becoming damaged. And not only that, but you have the same effect that happens in your arteries that you saw happening in the brain tissue to the arteries there. And so this is something, and this has been known for years. It's just, I don't know why it's not more well publicized. But you see here that in this paper from Journal of Diabetes, so forth and so on, we conclude that type 3 diabetes accurately reflects the fact that Alzheimer's disease represents a form of diabetes that selectively involves the brain and has molecular and biochemical features that overlap with both type 1 and type 2. So what that means is if you have type 2 diabetes, you're not necessarily have Alzheimer's or the type 3 diabetes. If you have type 3 diabetes, meaning Alzheimer's or something akin to that, it doesn't mean you're going to have type 2 diabetes. But all the warning signs are there earlier when you look at the metabolic syndrome list. So the more of those that you get hits on, the more likely you are to develop something in this direction. And if you have type 2 diabetes, you're more likely to develop Alzheimer's and dementia. So one of the things that usually gets people is they want to keep their brains for as long as you can. Well, if you eat in a way that doesn't create this situation, you can do that. And also, if someone does have Alzheimer's and dementia, or they're going in that direction, if you can clean up their diet, you never know how you can slow the progress of the disease down. I'm not saying you're going to cure it, but what if you slow it down to a point where they have 5, 10, 15 good years before the disease actually takes over? This is a normal brain, and that's Alzheimer's. So too much insulin in the brain, in the blood vessels and so forth, can actually create a situation that looks very much like the tangles and the amyloid plaques that develop in Alzheimer's. So you don't have to have type 3 diabetes to get Alzheimer's, but you can have type 3 diabetes that puts you in the state of having Alzheimer's and dementia. So something to keep in mind when you're looking at that food is saying, well, this does this to my kidneys, this does that to my liver, this does it to my heart and to my brain. And if you actually eat that food, well, then you have nobody else to blame but yourself for your future health issues. And that's something that I like to talk to clients about, is we're all putting ourselves to one degree or another in an early grave by our food choices. For so many years, particularly in my 20s, I ate whatever I wanted, and I had a list of health issues. I didn't know that what I was doing, and no one told me I was doing anything incorrectly. It was only because I bumped into somebody who does what I do that I finally started to have a bit of a light bulb go on. So the best thing to do, and I thought Will Rogers said it best, when you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. So when you find yourself in that health hole, stop digging and change the way that you're eating. So the way it works is nutritional deficiencies drive poor health, which drive organ dysfunction. You can fix that by removing those nutritional deficiencies, which means nutrient-dense foods on a regular basis. And I mean on a regular basis, not just, oh, I did this for a few weeks and I should be better. You know, and we've all done it. Oh, I exercised. I'm doing exercise once a week. I'm really doing a good job. No, you have to really eat well almost every day. You don't have to be perfect, but in some cases, to get out of the hole, you do. Most people find themselves in the dysfunctional state. And what I want to show you is that essentially when each organ, tissue, and gland has its own bank account, its own nutrient bank account. So you want to eat in a way to restore or keep that bank account high. Most processed foods have a little bit of sprayed on synthetic vitamins and so forth because they've removed all the good stuff, and it's not going to keep that bank account, and you're going to go into the yellow. And when you're diabetic, heart disease, strokes, you now have a disease state. And the further you go down the line, the more difficult it is to pull yourself out. So most people are in this state, and it's fairly easy over time to take yourself out as long as you are consistent with your food choices. So it doesn't get any more simple than that. Reduce and eliminate your sugary foods and your processed grains. If that's all you did, you go a long way. Now, you do want to replace them with real food, though, you know, not something else. This is what the havoc. I thought you guys might enjoy this. This is my vision of what happens when you eat sugar and processed food. It goes into your body and just wreaks havoc everywhere and destroys it without any, you know, heed or care about what it's doing to you. And if you can see the person in here, she's screaming and surprised. And a lot of us do that when we get a bad report. Well, how did this happen? Or I can't believe this. What's going on? Well, we did it to ourselves, and this is what's going inside your body every time you eat those kinds of foods. That's why the kidney and the liver and the arteries got this way. I have to put him here every time. Everyone's familiar with Jack LaLanne. Now, he was talking about this in the 50s, and diabetes is set to have 100 million people in 2050, so roughly 100 years after he's talked about it. So that was a poignant thing to me when I looked at that. You know, he says stay away from the sugar, the candy, the cakes, the ice cream, the jellies. All these foods are taste buds, and our way of self-medicating through foods tells us to do. So my concern is no matter what he said, and maybe no matter what I said, we're in a losing fight right now because diabetes is essentially set to take over the country in terms of its prevalence. And I'm hoping that little talks like this will then give you information, and then you can go to somebody else who's struggling. That's why I have those handouts, and give them a card and say, damn it, stop complaining, do something about your health, so that they don't become one of those 100 million people or one of those 550,000 people that die each year from heart disease. But he's the smartest guy around, and there were many other people saying the same thing. Avoid skipping meals. If you skip meals, you're more likely to eat sugary foods. If you skip meals, you're more likely to crash and go for the sugary foods later in the day. If you skip meals, you're more likely to binge in the evening, all the crappy food that makes your health poor. So, you know, when you eat dinner for breakfast, meaning have something substantial. Don't have that cereal. Don't have that bagel and orange juice. That's all sugar. Proteins, fats, and vegetables. So if you take nothing away from this, when you sit down to your meals, ask yourself to have protein, fat, animal, or plant. And as time goes on, the more organic the animal protein, the better. Particularly if it's eggs and deli meat. Wegmans has no junk deli meat, so no additives, preservatives, colorings, nitrates, any of that junk. Do I have a fat? And that's why I mentioned earlier. You need fat to keep yourself running. You need fat to keep your cravings down. You need fat to keep your inflammation down. So plant and animal, unrefined types of fats, and fill up the carbohydrate portion with vegetables. Carbohydrates are the grains and the vegetables. You don't need all those processed grains. They do nothing for you. Fill that up with lots of vegetables. The reason I mentioned that, if you have too many carbohydrates, your blood sugar goes straight up. So that typical breakfast with a cereal, maybe a bagel, some orange juice, or I've seen people lined up at Dunkin' Donuts, who knows what in the world they're getting, probably also a sugar-laden coffee. You're forcing this process, your blood sugar, to go so high, and your body then, over time, will burn out, and you'll develop diabetes and high triglycerides. Down at the bottom, fat does almost nothing. So if you include good carbohydrates that don't cause this high spike, lots of protein and good fat, you'll actually keep your blood sugar in a very good position. So the key thing is eating nutrient-dense meals. There is a difference. You know, look at these chickens versus those chickens. Which chickens would you like to eat? I would prefer these chickens. And so when people talk, and I do have to mention this about, you know, meat is bad, animal protein is bad, and I know there's a lot of things come out like forks over knives and things like that. They never stress the difference between real food and garbage. I mean, who wants those eggs? I don't want those eggs. They're full of antibiotics. And imagine how, when you walk through this, humans have to wear those super high-tech protective suits that you see with biochemicals and things like that. That's how bad it is. I want to go where the chickens are being chickens and really healthy. And that will keep me healthy. And the same thing goes for beef and pork and other things. If you eat commercial things like that, it's dipped in chlorine because they're so sick. So when you get it on your plate, you've had something that's been dipped in chlorine before it's served to you. And who knows what else has been done to it. These are not foods. Does anyone? These are not foods. I used to think these were foods. These are chemically and industrially produced non-food or food-like products designed to make you think you're eating foods. So if you've ever seen The Matrix, this is The Matrix, and this is reality. This is food, CoreLife. What's that? Well, it depends. A lot of cheese, this is low fat. You want real fat yogurt. You want real fat milk. You want real fat cheese. The low fat stuff is useless. It takes all the nutrition out and the fat that's so good for the person. So if you're going to eat cheese, get real 100% full fat cheese. If you're going to eat yogurt, it has nothing to do with weight gain. It has nothing to do with heart disease or diabetes. It'll actually help you feel more satiated. Usually in this low fat, you're going to put a lot of sugar too.
Even mayonnaise?
Yep, low fat. So all this is low fat junk. 94%, you know, this is all low fat.
Better to go full fat.
Full fat. And that's the thing that we've been hearing for so long is fat's bad, fat's bad. And it's almost like, you know, tearing away from reality to go back and eat the fat. But when I show you that thing for heart disease, that's when people were eating eggs, they were eating full cream, they were eating full cheese, they were eating all that stuff that's now or has been told to us as being bad.
Yeah, but essentially you're just saying low fat is not good for you, and yes, we should eat the fats, but it's in moderation. Like it's not eating it.
You really don't have to worry about it, to tell you the truth.
But at every meal, you
The fat.
have mayonnaise.
Oh, no, no.
That's what I'm
No, you don't have to have mayonnaise, but you don't have to be afraid of having fat with each meal.
Right.
And you can mix and match them.
What would you say is a good milk to have? 1%, 2%?
Full fat.
Full fat?
Yeah, but one caveat to that with the dairy is that if you have asthma, allergies, you have constipation issues, you have skin issues, you have sinus issues, you want to cut out the dairy. You want it to go away because that is part of the problem. And if you remove it, you will see those issues clear up in most cases quite quickly. It might not be the only thing, but if you have those inflammatory issues, pasteurized dairy is not a good thing. But if you're going to eat the pasteurized dairy and you don't have those issues that I mentioned, you want to go for the full fat, because the full fat is what your body uses to actually help you absorb nutrition and nutrients into your body. So if you have a very lean milk, it's basically sugar water, because all that is left is lactose.
Weird how they
It's
went back and forth.
it's topsy-turvy, yeah.
I couldn't drink whole milk at this point. I've given up milk. I don't even drink milk at all.
And that's the other thing. If you're lactose intolerant, that could, you know, you might as well just throw, in many cases, if you have those symptoms, milk and yogurt under the bus. Most people with those issues can still do, you know, good butter and cheese because it has a lot less lactose and casein. But good, you want full cheese. And now you can get the best cheese is raw cheese, and that's at Wegmans and our local food stores around here. It hasn't been pasteurized, so it has not been ruined through the high heat process. It still has to meet all the FDA health requirements. It's just and unaltered food. Pasteurization was brought about because of poor sanitation. Now we're stuck with pasteurization being the only way to keep milk healthy. It's not the only way, it's sanitation. So if good sanitation means good milk. So we've passed the point where we used to put chalk and all sorts of stuff into milk 100 years ago. So dairy, full fat if you can eat it, but keep it out if you have problems with it, skin issues, asthma, allergies, any kind of digestive issues, sinus issues, it really should go.
Yogurt is okay.
Most yogurts are good, but you want to make sure there's nothing added to it. Get a plain yogurt, put some raw honey, put some nuts and seeds, maybe a couple of berries. Don't get the flavored yogurts. That's big sugar bombs all over the place, and that's where people get caught. So always look at the labels on the back and see how much sugar. It doesn't matter if it says organic, gluten-free, whatever. You want to check those things because they could trick you into eating something that's full of sugar. And as I wrap up, the big thing that I talk about to everybody, it's consistency. When you change your diet or your way of eating, it has to be consistent. It can't be one day on, one day off, one week good, 1 week bad. You have to focus consistently because the only way to fill up your bank account is to be consistent. If your job is inconsistent or your spending is inconsistent with your income, how well is your bank account going to look? So if your eating is inconsistent, how well is your nutritional bank account going to look? And everyone has their break point. Some people can get away with a lot, others can't get away with much at all. One organ has a break point that's lower than another, so somebody's heart might go first, where somebody's kidneys might go first. And a lot depends on that person's initial makeup. And so what I thought to kind of inspire everybody in terms of going out to work on your health is there's one person that I found, and you think about this, he was behind the 8 ball, nothing was in his favor, he had a lot of work to do, and the only way he reached his goals was by being very consistent. And so, and I'm going to skip ahead so you don't have to listen to all. Well, maybe I can't skip ahead. Whoops, that ruins the... There we go. That way you don't have to listen to that. There we go. That's what I wanted. So think of this theme song when you're looking at your food and making dinner. And this should be you running towards your health goal every day. I don't see him slowing down either. So. So essentially, he was behind the 8 ball. He did what he needed to do. So I mention that and put this up there because if you're struggling with your health or you know someone who's struggling with their health, you can put yourself in complete control and improve your health to a great degree. Maybe not perfect, but get yourself out of that hole. So it is never too late to work on your health. Absolutely never. I'm working with someone who's in her 90s. It's never too late. I have several clients in their 80s and upper 70s. It's never too late. And if you know of someone who has needs some help, you can direct them towards me. But if not towards me, you direct them towards somebody and have them do something about their health. And if they're not in this area, there's got to be someone who lives nearby who will be willing to spend the time to help them. So hopefully everybody enjoyed the talk, learned a little bit. This will be, I don't think will be, yeah, you'll be able to watch all the videos again too on Facebook. And we'll also put it up on our website. I'm not sure how soon we'll be able to do that, but at least it will be up on the CoreLife for the first week or so before we get it onto our stuff. tell somebody in another state to watch it and let them go and do something about their health. But ultimately, you have to make the decision that it's your responsibility. And once you do that, everything improves from there. So again, thank you very much, and you all have a great evening.